Welcome to the RealTea. I'm your host, Tammy Murphy, broker owner of RH2L, bringing Miami Valley real homes to love.
And I'm Ellie Sollenberger to give my perspective as a home buyer.
We're going to give you the key to Miami Valley real estate. Today we're going to talk about the negotiation, getting the best deal, and getting into contract.
So I feel like when we put our first offer in was really a changing point in looking for a house with us.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, because it kind of makes the deal feel real. Like We're just looking at houses and getting ideas, but now we actually are writing it up. Right?
And it's also the first time I convinced my husband to look outside of what he was comfortable with.
Yes, because again, having that idea of what it is that you're interested in kind of is the starting point. This is what we're looking for. This is how many bedrooms, how much square footage. Ideally, this is what we want in our price range, right? But what happened? We found the one, we thought. The one house that actually hit all the boxes. It checked everything, and we wanted to be all in. So that was kind of a wild experience, wasn't it?
Right. So I found it on, I think, Zillow or Realtor.com, and I sent it to you. I showed it to him. I said, let's go look at this tomorrow. You set us up for, I think it was like 11 a.m., and we were like the 20th showing.
Yeah. It was insane. Like getting into the schedule, and they still were even allowing overlapping appointments, so other people could be there at the same time. It was 15-minute increments that they had us set up on showings, which was ridiculous. I mean, because this is a larger size home.
Right. And it was, over 4,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, 3 floors.
Yeah, seeing that in 15 minutes was going to be like a whirlwind.
Right.
But we were off and running, and so we did. And then you knew as soon as you hit the front porch, I think.
That we loved it. And this is another house that the pictures did not do it justice at all. And even from outside, it was smaller from the front, and it was huge
on the inside.
On the inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was so nicely maintained. I mean, pictures will only do so much, but when you walk into the home and you see the care that somebody has taken with the property, and everything is just nice and clean and shiny, like the surfaces doesn't have any dust on it. I mean, their level of immaculate was there, because I think that really grabbed our attention. We walked in, it smelled clean, it looked clean. There was nothing immediately that was like a negative imprint.
And this was the first time too that I saw where the realtor had actually made up cards and pointed stuff out. Things like a heated driveway, or things like the custom blinds, things like that. And they also did a pre-inspection.
Right. Which, as we talked about, is of benefit in one respect. One, it's showing that the seller probably has a pretty good idea that what their home is going to represent is going to be good, right? They're not worried about having some inspection take place that if there is something, we're going to take care of it, they're going to address it. And the other reason why they do it is, hey, we're selling it as is, and so this is what we know. This is what we found during this. They weren't selling it as is. They did this as a courtesy to say, we've done this. You certainly have the right to do your own inspection, but here's what we found, and no, there were no problems, right? I mean, there was just your general language in there about maintenance and upkeep, which by the appearance of the house, we knew that they had been doing.
Yeah, and it was really kind of easing of the potential buyer to know that I could do an offer with no inspection if I wanted, and all of the information is already right there.
And we talked about that because obviously that inspection report was good for the day that that inspector came out there and did it. So if it was January 1st and the inspector came out and did it, and we were seeing it on January 2nd, okay, there's a whole lot of peace of mind, right? But sometimes there'll be a pre-inspection that's sitting there and it's several months old. Doesn't mean that it is exactly that same condition now. So that's where we would caution, as a realtor, I'm going to caution clients to say we have to take it with a grain of salt because something could have changed. But it also is a great indicator. I mean, it really does give you a basis then to be able to say, well, it doesn't say that this is a problem, but I see a water leak here. Now you have something that you can refer to. But again, peace of mind, if you are considering not doing an inspection, because you know that it's going to be that heated of a battle to get into contract, right? That you're going to be competing for multiple offer positions. Maybe not having the inspection gets you a step ahead. And so you have that piece of comfort from them doing doing a pre-inspection. That's the word.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm kind of taking us right back to, we decided we were going to put the offer in.
Yeah. Yeah, so we talked about the terms of the contract and what do we have as the ability to set ourselves apart, because everybody who's going to be making an offer is going to be using a contract, and it's going to be apples to apples. You would hope that the comparison's going to be made. So we talk about the offer price, what you're willing to buy the property for. So list price isn't necessarily the purchase price, but if it's listed at $200,000 and you wanted to make an offer of $225,000, then that would be your offer price versus the list price as a scenario. The next part we talked about is the earnest money, and that's always something that buyers need to be aware of, is that you have some money up front that you may be coming out of pocket during this process that's not included with your closing cost or the loan itself, right, when we get to the closing table.
So I remember the first house we bought, I did not know what earnest money was.
Right.
And that was a different price level of house. So
Right.
I believe then we did like $500.
Yeah.
And then so I thought just all earnest money was $500.
And it's absolutely negotiable. You don't have to give earnest money, but like I like to say, earnest money is putting your mouth where your foot is. Putting your foot where your mouth. What is it? What's the saying?
Putting your foot where your mouth is.
What?
Yeah.
Putting your best foot forward. That's
Right.
what we're going to say. It's putting your best foot forward. It means that you're putting your money where your mouth is. That's it.
There it is. Yeah.
Your money where your mouth is, because you're saying, I'm not just writing this offer to be writing this offer. I'm actually putting up some money that shows I have the intent of making this a contract that I will stand by. So it is a set number. Typically, it's based on the value of the home. It could be $100, it could be $200, it could be $500, it could be $1,000. And in this particular case, we thought this was the one, the house, and we knew that there was a lineup of people already going to present offers. And so we talked about doing a higher number, making that number something that would really catch the attention of the seller, because if everybody else was writing $500 or $1,000 as their earnest money, and we wrote $2,000, then that $2,000 is going to stand out to the seller and potentially move our contract to the top of their list of wanting to work with.
What's the highest earnest money you've ever seen on a contract?
Believe it or not, I was so absolutely nervous about this. I had a buyer and he wanted the house and he knew the importance of earnest money. He wrote it for $25,000.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And, you know, obviously this is money that should come back to the buyer at the closing table. There's a whole process that's involved with earnest money when we start talking about it. That good faith that it presents is that the buyer and the seller are going to both go through this process with the intent of getting to the closing table. Is the earnest money ever in jeopardy? That's a question I get. Yes, it is in jeopardy if you as the buyer decide at willy-nilly, whatever, you just don't want to go through with it. And now this seller has lost time on the market, or a potential other buyer, or has made repairs or done something that was requested in your contract that now they're not even going to get to the closing table. At that point, the seller potentially could make a claim against the earnest money. So is there a chance that you could lose it? Yes, if something goes off kilter. But the normal part of the process, it is the buyer's money. They get it back at the closing, whether they get it back as a return to them or they use it as part of their closing funds at the closing table. That depends on the lender and what they require.
So besides earnest money, what else are you looking at for the offer?
So then we talked about how else do we set ourselves apart on this contract. So the offer price, what we're willing to do, and what do we want to say? Like if you're all in on this house like you were, right? I'm willing to pay the list price, but I will raise my offer. So that's where we talk about that escalation clause. An escalation clause is where you say either by incremental amounts you're willing to increase your offer if there are competing offers that you wanted to beat. So let's just use an example. The offer price was listed at $200,000, but you'd be willing to go up to $225,000. Well, you wouldn't necessarily go all in at $225,000, but maybe you say by increments of $1,000 or $2,000, I would go up to as high as that $225,000. Then the seller is really looking not at your offer as a $200,000, but potentially as $225,000. They got another offer that they're looking at as a competing offer that offered $215,000. Well, right away they would say, well, this offer goes to $216,000, so this offer is still the better offer. So that's why an escalation clause became really in play during this low inventory, crazy scenario where buyers are trying and competing against other buyers on the first day, in most cases, of a property being listed.
Right. So how do I know that the seller's realtor is being honest about other offers?
Well, there is a thing that you can put in there is that they have to give you evidence of a competing offer. So depending on the language that's used and how you write your escalation clause, thankfully our state association had put together an escalation clause form that you could just basically go through, because we're not attorneys. I can't practice law and write a contract. I have to use the sanctioned contracts and clauses that are out there so that it's standard use. But that also makes it a level playing field. So if I know that I could use this form, somebody else could use this form, which is where we have to be in tune with what are you really willing to pay for this property? How much are you willing to go above, if you're willing to go above, on what terms? So the escalation and how you incrementally adjust that, as well as then the appraisal gap that comes into play potentially. So just because a buyer is willing to pay $250,000 for that $200,000 house doesn't mean that the lender and the appraiser is going to give that same value.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So when you're doing the offer and you put in an appraisal gap or an escalation clause, you want to make sure that you have those funds that you can bring to the table.
Right. So if you're doing the escalation, then the next thing comes into play is how is that house going to appraise? Is it going to appraise for the higher value that you might have actually ended up buying it? And if it is, then you don't have a problem because your lender is going to know that the price was adjusted. But if you do that appraisal gap and you sign off on it to say you're guaranteeing that even though the house will only appraise for $200,000, but you've agreed to buy it for $225,000, that you potentially as the buyer aren't going to be able to get a loan for $225,000, you're only going to be able to get a loan up to $200,000, means that you could be on the hook for that additional $25,000 in order to cover that cost, which then gives the seller peace of mind that they don't have to worry about it being a short appraisal. They don't have to worry about the buyer not having funds, because all through this process you're going to be giving proof that you can actually do what you say you're going to be able to do.
So for your clients that you've done that with, do they often fall short on appraisals, or is it more of the home is underlisted?
Right. And so this was our situation, because I have had properties during this crazy, we're going to call it the last 3 years have been real chaos, right? I've had offers on listings that I represented the sellers that buyers' agents were writing escalation clauses. And in my experience, the seller was like, well, I don't want to deal with any of that. I just want who made the best offer. I had another client who's like, where did I get the most money? Where's the one that taps it the highest? That's the one I'm going to look at, and the rest of them can fall off. In our situation, this was the first time that you set a number that normally would scare anybody, right? And you were like, we're willing to go to this price. We're willing to pay up to this amount. And I didn't have a concern about the value of the home, because I really felt the value of the home was there. It was presented in the condition of that home, with the maintenance, with the updates, with the added features that this home had. There's no way that that property could come back with a short appraisal. So do I have the magic answer? No, I don't have the crystal ball, and appraisers can always go off and give us a value that maybe as the agent I wouldn't agree with, buyer or seller's agent, because Obviously, if they come in short, it's saying my house isn't worth what I thought it was worth. It isn't worth what my agent thought it was worth. And on the buyer side, it's not worth what I was willing to pay for it. So am I still willing to come out of pocket in order to pay for it and make the deal happen? So the appraiser, again, is like that inspector, a third neutral party whose benefit is to make sure that if there's a bank loan that's happening, that the value is there and represented in the loan, that it's covered. So way back, there was this whole fiasco of things that happened, and we had a lot of foreclosures, and we had a lot of people who lost homes, and we had a lot of property value that was sucked away and we lost, right? It was a result of having a system where the appraisers were just writing the numbers. Not negative against you appraisers, I'm not going to say anything like that, but it was a system that was broken because it didn't matter. They were giving the value to the house and the value really wasn't represented. Okay, so when you have a downturn in the economics, you have to really make sure that the value is there. So that's why a third party coming in and giving their professional opinion is important to the process. In the case of where we are now, property values in our area, I think our auditor stated it was like 36% in our area of appreciation. That's a huge gain of market value for a property. So if the property was $100,000, it's now really $136,000. That's a big step, right?
Yeah.
So you can just do the math, easy math even, and double some numbers here. And suddenly when you're writing a higher price on the purchase and you're saying you're willing to cover that without the bank loan, then these are the reasons why you want to know and understand what additional language you're adding to a contract. What clause are you using and what does it mean to you? And is it really something that you can do? Can you perform? But is it also something that works with your budget as you move forward, that you're comfortable and know that you did the right thing?
Right. So what other different things can you choose when you're putting in a contract?
So then the other thing you talk about is your inspection process, whether or not you're going to do an inspection.
So when would you be okay with telling your buyers you don't need to do an inspection?
I'm not going to ever make that decision, right?
Okay.
Because it's not my decision, it's the buyer's. I will say that every buyer has the right to be able to do their inspection because every buyer has a different set of situations. We talk about, is there lead-based paint in the house if it was built before 1978? Well, the answer is yes. Obviously, if it was built before 1978, lead-based paint was used. But does that mean over the years that it has been encapsulated, painted over, removed, or any of these things to where it's a concern? I can't answer that for somebody. If somebody is sensitive to that, then they may want to do that additional layer of an inspection to say, I want to know if there's lead-based paint and I want to have it removed if there is any. Just like somebody with mold, if they have a susceptibility to that, if they're sensitive to that, if they detect that there's water or moisture or the area is just known for it, they may want to do a deeper dive in their inspection process. But to waive an inspection would mean you want to know without really any concern that you could fix or repair anything that would happen to come up or be found, or that, and I hear people say this all the time, well, I'm building my house, so I don't have to have an inspection. Guess what? I'm the person that did an inspection throughout the phases of building a home because I wasn't confident with what product was going to be used if I wasn't able to see. So once the drywall is up, you don't know what the 2x4s behind look. So on a normal construction site, you've got materials that are delivered at the beginning of the process and they lay out there until they get used. Well, guess what happens to wood when it lays out in the weather?
Like yesterday, it got rained on.
So all of a sudden now you're putting this wood that's accumulated water, moisture, and been out in the elements, and now you're going to put it inside my walls. And I literally had a board, a 2x4, that instead of being straight, went like this. I mean, it would look like it was a letter S. And if I'm the buyer and I'm now going to go to put up my nail in the wall to hang a picture and I have a board that isn't straight, right? That's going to be a problem for me. So I was that particular person that I knew that I wanted to be able to do an inspection during the phases when these things were marked off by the construction so that I knew that it was taken care of. If I do that level of checking on my own, I have to be willing and able and open to that for my clients. But sometimes you walk into a house and you just see that it's been well maintained. There isn't anything that looks like it's a problem, and I don't need to do an inspection. As the buyer who's willing to say that, I'm going to make sure you know that it's your right to do it, but I understand that if you don't want to, we won't go through that part of the process. And we could waive our right to do an inspection. You also could choose to do just a segment, like I'm really only concerned if I see something on the roof, or I'm really only concerned if there's something wrong with the electrical. And you can narrow down what type of inspection you want to do, which again sets your contract apart from maybe somebody that's coming in and doing a full house inspection. In the seller's mind, somebody that's willing to buy it and not do an inspection may be a better option for them to accept their offer.
In case anything would pop up that the sellers don't know about.
Right.
Okay. And then so the last part is really like when you're going to close?
Yeah, so then how fast are you able to make the closing happen? So typically if you're getting a loan, you're probably looking at 3 weeks to 30 days to 45 days, depending on the type of loan. And if you've got a seller and they've just hit the market and they are also looking to make a move, trying to coordinate those dates really can be a negotiation part. You know, this is part of the skill we bring to the table, is to say, have the conversation with the listing agent. If they don't provide the information in the listing, does the seller need to live in the home after the closing? Do they need a quick closing because they need to move on? They're getting relocated for work. Any of those things really help to make the deal. So if you can close the property in 3 weeks, and you're going to give the seller 2 weeks to live in it, then you're talking about a closing period that's quicker than normal, and they're getting occupancy that allows them to transition to do what they need to do. If that works for the buyer, that might be what gets you the contract, because somebody else may just write 30 days or 45 days and they want occupancy at closing. Now the seller has to decide, as my one client did, do we move everything out and take it on faith that these people are really going to do what they're going to do and get to the day of the closing and then they don't, right? Or they do, but I still have to be out of the house. So I don't want to be moving on the same day that I'm doing the closing. Right. So it's a lot to really pull together, negotiate, and make your offer stand out from others, because you've taken these things into consideration, not just from your perspective as the buyer, but also understanding how that reacts to the seller side.
So is there anything that's standard with the industry? Like, is it normally 45 days or is it normally 30?
It's really pretty much 30, and everybody, for whatever reason, likes to close at the end of the month, you know, and this is one of the things that I learned by working with lenders and hearing how, you know, the title companies, everybody is hitting them in this last week of the month. It's easy if something happens, you don't have a piece of paper right where it needs to be, suddenly you get pushed. I don't like for clients to go through that. So I'm an advocate for, let's talk to the lender, and if they can close it earlier and we can do a 3-week closing, now we're 3rd week or middle of the month in being able to close a deal, we've just circumvented all that backup that takes place by everybody who wants to close at the end of the month. So the difference is how is the interest paid out on the loan? When is your first payment due, right? Because as the buyer, maybe the benefit of not having a payment due that next month is your cushion, because that becomes your move money. Then you get the bonus of, my next payment is the month after. So if you close too early in the month, does that make this next month my payment due, right? And if it does, then that probably isn't a benefit. So that's why we talk with the lender, with the buyer, to make sure what's the best thing for you. Because if we can close it earlier, you still don't have to make the payment until 2 months from now. It's a done deal, and it works for you. And it gives you that lag time to be able to transition from one property into your new one.
So for this house, we absolutely loved it. We decided our original offer was going to be, $25,000 over asking?
Yeah.
With an escalation clause of up to $100,000. No inspection, close within 3 weeks, and let's find out on the next episode if we got it.
Awesome.
So, Tammy, what is our tip for their listeners this week?
So the tip is, Know what you want and need in your budget and in your house, and what you can add or change later. If you know that, you're ahead of the game. Thanks for joining us today on the RealTea podcast. If you enjoyed the knowledge and entertainment today, please subscribe and share with your friends. Every other week, we will be embarking on a journey that bridges the gap between realtors and clients, uncovering the heart and tea of real estate.